everybody. As I come in a little bit closer to you all. For those of you who haven't met me and who hasn't been at any of the stuff so far, my name is Michelle Gregory. I am the founder of Knit School and all-round brioche knitting fanatic. So tonight, what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a little bit of talking about what brioche is. I'm going to do it all on camera so that you can see what I'm doing, so you can see all of the so what I'm talking about, you'll see, because there's no point in me talking about it as like a presentation or anything like that. So I'm going to take you through kind of key points of brioche, and then we're actually just going to get straight into it. And we're using the pattern that you got as part of this. If you haven't seen it, you can download it from, there's a link either in the emails you've been getting from me every day. And if you haven't been getting them, check your spam, or if you're in the Facebook group with me, you should have access to that as well. There's a link at the top of the page, and that's what we're working from today. It's in the round. So the cowl itself is knitted the round, and that's the easiest way, I think, to learn how to do two-colour brioche, because working it flat is slightly different, but we're going to start with it in the round. So that's what we're working on. The patterns are in the, so it is either changing colour or keeping it straight and working straight up. So in this workshop, we're going to cover 10 main points about brioche. I'm then going to talk about the main stitches that make it up and what it is. And then we're going to go straight into these, and I'm going to show you how to do this first, how you would do the rows that make this one up. And then as we progress through the workshop, I'm going to show you how to change colour for anybody who's working on it. This is obviously being recorded, so you can catch up with it later, but I am going to do it because I have a number of people who actually, if you are working along with me, if you put a little 1 in the chat box or a yes in the chat box, so I know who's knitting along with me, because I know some people are watching and some people are actually knitting along with me. We're going to take our time at it though, because there's no point in kind of rushing through. Oh, it's great. I see people are, yay, I'm so glad people are working along. Terry, I like that you're working along-ish. So yeah, I'm going to take my time, nice and slow, and I'm going to do it a few times as well so that everybody gets a chance to see it. Just if you haven't seen, I'll show you some different types of stitches in it towards the end. We won't worry about those now. It's a little bit more complicated and there's lots of things you can do with it, but it's very core. It's actually quite straightforward. So I'm going to switch across. Wish me luck with the camera as I flip across, and then we will get and do some knitting. Yeah, I'm so glad to see so many of you are working along with me. Yippee! Right, my dears, I'm going to swap my camera and I am going to move. Fingers crossed. Yes, I always worry, and I'll give myself a little bit of extra light as well. So I'm going to start this as if none of you have ever seen brioche before. Oh, thank you, Jane. It is a love note by Tin Can Knits. It is, I'd say, I think there's probably lots of people with them there. It's a fabulous pattern. So, right. What is brioche? So brioche is both stitch type and a whole knitting technique, is the way I like to think about it, because you have, it's like anything, you know, these stitches that I have here, they're just ordinary knit stitches in the same way that brioche is one. It just has its own kind of quirks, a little bit like lace and cables, all have their own quirks. So it's both a rib stitch and a slip stitch. So if you look at an ordinary rib stitch, so this is ordinary rib, 1 by 1 rib. So you have a knit row and a purl row, a knit row and a purl row. Well, a column, knits and purls, knits and purls. So that is what an ordinary rib looks like. This is what brioche looks like. So brioche is made up of knits and purls and knits and purls. And they're made up of pairs of stitches. So a knit and a purl, a knit and a purl, a knit and a purl. So it is a rib stitch. So it's not that much different to a rib, except for the small variations in it. So that's just to show you that it's not anything very new. It's just a slightly different version of a rib stitch. So that's the first thing, it's a rib stitch. You can also see that it's kind of a chunkier rib stitch. And the reason for that is that it's a slip stitch. So if you look at slip stitches, these are some of the ones you might be familiar with. Actually, if I flip it around, it'll be the right way around. This is the linen stitch. So linen stitch is made by knitting a stitch, bringing your yarn forward and slipping the next stitch, bringing your yarn back, knitting the stitch, bringing the yarn forward. This one up here is a bobble stitch. It's made by bringing the yarn back and forth all the way around and slipping all of the stitches in the row. And then this one up here is like a, what is this? Like a trellis stitch. No, tweed stitch. And it's made by slipping the stitches at the back. Brioche is kind of in this category as well, because it's a slip stitch. But the difference is how you hold the yarn when you slip the stitch. So you take the slip stitch element and the rib element and you get brioche. So that's just to give you an idea that it's not anything really new. It's just a slightly different method. And that's why it looks quite familiar when you look at it, just a little bit different. So what do we need to know about it before we start? It's worked in pairs of stitches. So here, if you see this example, use this one actually, rather than that yet. You have a knit and a purl, a knit and a purl, and they always have to be kind of balanced together, particularly in the round. Now, you will have times when you work flat and you might have an uneven number and they kind of get paired off like that, but not as common. It's mostly just pairs of stitches. So in one round, you work a stitch and you slip its pair. In the following row around, you will slip the stitch you worked and work the stitch you slipped in the previous one. We won't worry about that. It sounds like lots of words at the moment, and it doesn't, but I want to cover it now and then at the end once you've seen it, and then it'll make loads of sense. They're always pairs of stitches. Each row around is worked twice, so that, as I was saying, you work a stitch, slip a stitch, work a stitch, slip a stitch, and then in the next round you slip it and work it and slip it and work it. They're called passes. We'll talk about what that looks like in patterns as well. All slipped stitches in brioche are slipped with the yarn at the front of the work. And it's one of the reasons that people go very wrong with brioche, is that the pattern sometimes doesn't tell you that when you're going to slip, you have to bring the yarn to the front. But I'm going to show you that as well. I'm not going to talk about increases and decreases until the end, because I'm not going to worry about them in this. You'll hear a lot of people talking about burping and barking. I find that a little bit confusing. It is a brioche knit and a brioche purl, and that's how I talk about them. So you hear people talking about barking as brioche knitting and burping as brioche purling. I don't talk about that because I find it complicates something unnecessarily. So it's a brioche knit or a brioche purl, and then there's always a setup round to get into it when you start. So patterns as well can be a combination of regular stitches and knit stitches or brioche stitches. All again, loads of chat to just kind of get us going. Let me just check here. There we go. And I am going to then, there's three things you need to know before we start. There is a brioche knit, a brioche purl, and a slip one yarn over. That is a bring your yarn forward, slip one yarn over. And I'm going to talk you through all of those as we go around. And that's one of the reasons that working two colors in the round makes the most sense, because you get to do brioche knits and brioche purls in that, and the slip one yarn over, which are the three key stitches of brioche. So all of that is enough said. So let's bring out the pattern and the knitting. So I'm going to start with these ones. You'll have to forgive me, my rib is actually a 2x2 rib. Ignore that. I'm so used to doing it for a sock. So with the pattern, you'll see on the inside, in the teeny tiny writing, that I have a brioche knit. So it's a knit stitch with its shawl, so the slipped shawl with its yarn over. We'll talk about there in a minute. Brioche purl, just knits and purls, main color and contrast color as you would have in any pattern. And then you have a slip one yarn over. When you're working in knit round, it's a yarn forward, slip one yarn over. And when it's a purl round, it's a slip one yarn over. Now this all sounds a bit like you're probably thinking that sounds ridiculous, but it's all going to become very clear very soon. So again here, do read this section, because this is the most important thing with brioche. It's about yarn placement, but I'm going to cover all of that when I get into the pattern. So don't worry about it. Most of it is around not twisting your yarns when you change them, because it's not like in target. So for anyone who does a lot of color work in the round. And then again, it's about the yarn overs and looking after them, and then moving between color sections. But don't worry, we're going to cover all of that in just a moment. So all going well for those of you who have done the pre-knitting. And I know that some of you may not have been pre-knitting, but for anyone who's pre-knitting with me right now, this bit is where we're starting. So you'll have either done a rib, an ordinary rib, or you'll have done 4 rounds of stocking stitch. Fingers crossed, if you haven't done them, there's no problem. We're going to be doing quite a bit of, I'll be doing quite a bit of talking as I do the first round. So if you want to whip those up pretty quickly, I know not everybody has had a chance to do those. So where we are right now is we have just worked to here, the main color attached. So we're going to join our contrast color and do our setup round. Option one, yes, so the pink and yellow is option, well, it actually doesn't matter. So Charlotte, you can either knit option one or option, you cannot knit either. Option, yes, and once you move into the main pattern, it is option one. Option one is where you have this is option one without the color changes once you move out of the rib section, and this is option two. So you choose from either set in either one. So I'm going to be working this piece here. So you'll see here that you have a setup round in either option, and that's always in brioche. And the reason for that is that it's the round where you create the brioche stitches with your slip one yarn overs for the first time. So we're going to work in our contrast color, we're going to work the setup round, and then we're going to work round one, main color, contrast color. So we talked about working the different passes. So this is pass one and pass two. So that's what we're doing at the moment. We're going to start here with setup round one. So this is where you do this with all brioche. So I have an even number of stitches on my needles. I'm coming up to the start of my round. I'm going to purl my last stitch of my rib round, and I'm going to move my ring. Now, with this, when you take your yarn to join it in, you want to come from the back of the work to the front. So you always have your tail at the back, so into the center of your round. And the reason I say that is that because you are yarn in front, slipping yarn over, you could think that it's easy to have it all the way here and just slip the stitch and then it bring it back through, but it's actually, it has to come from the center of the work. So put your yarn into the center of your ring and bring it through your needles to the front of the work. Don't lose your marker. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do a slip one yarn over. So this is the key movement in brioche, essentially. My yarn is at the front. Every time I slip yarn over, it must be at the front. So this is the key thing. And you may have seen patterns where it doesn't tell you to bring it to the front. That's where most people go wrong with brioche. I'm going to slip my stitch. I'm going to slip it purlwise. So slip it purlwise. So that's the slip one part. This is the yarn over part. So take it over. That is a slip one yarn over. It's adding what we call a shawl to the stitch, and it's the yarn over piece of it. Now, my next instruction is to purl. So I bring the yarn back through to the front of the needles, and I purl my next stitch. So now I have a slip stitch and a worked stitch, so a pair of stitches, and one of them has what we call a shawl. So that is now a brioche stitch shawl ready to work in the next round. The next thing you do is you slip this next stitch. So that's your slip one with the yarn over. So again, the yarn goes over the top of the needle. So that's your slip one yarn over. And then you bring the yarn back through to the front to purl. And purl your next stitch. So you can see that I'm beginning the setup of my brioche. So I'm adding the shawls for the very first time. That's why there's always a setup row in brioche, because otherwise it's not brioche because you've never added any shawls. So I'm going to work around and I'm going to slip as I go. So slip one, yarn over, come to the front, purl. Slip one yarn over, bring it over, bring it back to the front to purl, purl my next stitch. So if you're working along with me, I'm just going to untangle myself and I'm going to do that all the way around. And as I come up to here, I'm going to pause. So if you have any questions for now, pop them in the chat because I can answer them as I go. So I'm slipping, yarn over, bring it to the front to purl. Slip one, yarn over, bring it to the front to purl. Shimmy my yarns as I go. Slip one, yarn over, bring it to the front to purl. So that's all you're doing all the way around to set up. The mistakes that people make here are not, you'll notice very quickly. So the mistakes that people make is they do this, you forget to come forward and you purl, and that'll give you a fallen shawl stitch essentially here at the inside. It's the first mistake everyone makes in brioche, and if you make it, don't worry about it. It can be fixed. Well, it can be fixed in the next piece, but right now try to get a shawl and a purl the whole way around. So yarn over, purl, slip one, yarn over, purl. And eventually they become the same movement, so you slip and yarn over at the same time, but that will come later. So now you come back and have a little bit of a look before we move on. You have pairs of stitches. You should have shawl stitch, purl, shawl stitch, purl, shawl stitch, purl, and they are in pairs like that. So that's the first thing that you're checking for. Now we're going to keep going. Slip, yarn over, bring to the front, and purl. Slip one, yarn over, bring to the front, purl. So on my 1x1 rib, I slip every knit right. Technically, yes, it would be, Charlotte, because that's the pattern is set up that way. But that might not always be the case, but in this pattern, yes. Because the 1x1 rib is designed to line up with the brioche. So slip one, bring to the front and purl. Slip one, bring to the front and purl, and you're yarning over all the way. Slip one, yarn over, bring to the front and purl. Slip one, yarn over, purl. And you can see how you get into a nice rhythm with this. The thing with brioche is actually it's harder to go back, I think. So now I'm coming up to the start of my round marker. This is where all the issues happen when you're working the round, I think. It's always that changeover point. So we're going to go through that very slowly. We'll start slowly. Slip one, yarn over, purl my stitch. Slip one, yarn over, purl my stitch. Come to the end, slip one, yarn over, purl. Now, when you purl that last stitch with your contrast color, take your yarn through the needles to the back of the work. It's in the pattern. Drop the contrast color to the back of the work. Now, the reason that that's important is because you don't want it on, this is the contrast color. You don't want it lurking around in the front. It doesn't need to be there, so you want to tuck it back into the back. Now, that's only with the contrast color for now, so we're not going to worry about it. Right, so that's it. How are we doing? How's everybody doing who's knitting along with me? I know I'm asking you to knit and talk at the same time. Would anyone like, we can do the setup round again, no problems as well. I will do it again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get everybody working, and then I'm going to start. I have 3 different options for showing you the start off as well. So that's the first round. That's your setup. Okay, so awesome. People are with me. Right. So when you come here, just leave your yarn over there on its own. I'm going to move my gold around here. You're going to pick up the yarn from where you've been working it. You're not twisting them. There's no need. No need to twist them at all. And what you're going to do is we're about to start brioching for the first time. So this is where we are right now. Main color, brioche knit, yarn forward, slip one yarn over, repeat all the way around, drop main color to the front of the work. So this is your round 1 of brioche with your main color, and it's brioche knit, yarn forward, slip one yarn over. So we're going to see this. This is the very first time you're actually going to do a brioche stitch, actually knit it. And when you see it, you're going to be mesmerized by how straightforward it is. I'm going to hold my yarn as normal. Don't worry, Fran, you've all night. Slip my marker. And what you see here, all going well, if you brought your yarn from the back of the work like you're supposed to, I hate saying things like you're supposed to, but it is definitely supposed to come from the back. You will have a stitch and a shawl. Your brioche knit, you insert the tip of your needle into the stitch and its shawl together, and you knit them together. That's it. You knit them as if they were a single stitch. You knit them together like that. That's it. You've now just done your first brioche knit stitch. Now, this is where the yarn forward, slip one yarn over comes in. It tells you to bring the yarn forward to the front of the work and slip the next stitch. So this is your blue stitch from the last round. This time you're going to slip that one. So you slip it, and you yarn over it like we've talked about before. And this time you don't bring it forward because your next stitch is a knit stitch. So you bring it over. So it's slip one yarn over, brioche knit. So like we were saying, the brioche knit, you knit the stitch and its shawl together, knit the two of those together, and that's your second brioche stitch. Then it's a yarn forward, bring it to the front, slip one, yarn over, and then you're going to do your brioche knit stitch next. So the shawl and the stitch together, knit the two of those together. So we now have a brioche knit and knit the shawl together with the stitch. We brought the yarn forward and we slipped stitch and we did our little yarn over. We knit one and we slipped one yarn over and then we brioche knit. And that is essentially what brioche is. I have a pair, and in the first round, I slipped this one and I worked this one. And in this round, I worked this one and then I slipped the second one. That is the idea behind why it's two passes and how they are worked as pairs of stitches. It becomes a lot more obvious when we get into it, but that is the very essence of brioche. So I'm going to keep working. If you have any questions, ask them. So we'll keep working. My next one, and you probably think, what if I pause and I don't know what's happening? A good rule of thumb in two colors is that you should have the color you're working in is the one with the shawls as you come up to it, and the ones that are on their own should be the other color. It's quite a good rule of thumb. It's different when you're changing colors, but we'll worry about that way later on. So again, yarn forward through the needles, slip my stitch, bring my yarn over and knit my stitch. Yarn forward through the needles, slip the stitch, bring it over and knit your stitch. Things that catch people here are forgetting to bring your yarn forward and slipping the stitch, only this time it's on the inside, so it's a little bit harder to spot. But again, you're just going to concentrate on bringing it through and knitting. Another habit that you might find yourself is bringing it forward to the front because you've just been practicing that on the previous round. Don't worry, that's very common. So I'm going to knit those together. And I'm just going to show you what it looks like if I miss one stitch and I knit this. You'll see that when you go to knit the other stitch that it looks a little bit odd and there's a little bit of extra tail in it. So that's what happens if you knit the shawl without the stitch. And you're looking to not do that at the moment, all going well. But it's just to tell you the kinds of things that people run into when they're doing it. So the next one is I'm yarning over. And this time I know I need to knit them because I have a stitch and shawl beside it. And I knit those two together. Then I bring the yarn forward through the needles, slip, knit my next stitch. Yarn forward, slip my next stitch, yarn over, and knit the two of those. Yarn forward, slip one, over the top, and knit. And it becomes a rhythm after a while. You kind of, with this one, you slip it, and then you actually get ready to knit the next stitch as you go. So with the knit stitches, it's quite good in that you bring your yarn forward, you slip, and then you're nearly ready to go straight into the knit stitch before you do the yarn over. It is better when you're learning to kind of get used to doing the yarn over before, but it does get a lot faster when you do that with the brioche. Coming forward, slipping, and then knitting the stitch. Yarn forward, slip the stitch, knit the next stitch while creating the yarn over as well. Anyone have any questions at the moment? So slip, knit the next two stitches together. And don't worry, I will go again from the very start as well. Yarn forward, slip one, over the top with your yarn over, and knit the brioche, knit them together. Now I say knit. And the reason I say knit is that in brioche knitting, it is a brioche knit. It makes the most sense. There's no point in like the whole idea of the people talking about barking and burping. Just think of them as knit stitches that you include the shawl in. The shawl is just part of what brioche is. And if you kind of get that, if you get that, it doesn't, calling it anything special just takes, you know, calling it something special puts a mystery into it that it doesn't really have. So slipping and we're knitting. We're slipping and we're brioche knitting, but we're knitting them together. And then we're coming around here, and this is where the crunch is when you are doing working the round. And again, yarning over, brioche knitting, yarning over and slipping and brioche knitting. And it's the biggest issue you'll have when you go back is not bringing your yarn forward. It's my biggest problem. By myself, if I do a lot of brioche knitting, I have to think about my life again. So what I have here now is I have one slip stitch ready to go. Then I have another brioche knit and another stitch I'm going to slip. And this is very common when you are working a brioche knit round. So a pass with the brioche knitting is that you often end the round on a slip stitch. And when you finish on a slip stitch, it's very, very easy to lose the shawl. And that is where the vast majority of people go wrong in brioche. It's the loss of the shawl here is your biggest issue. So I'm going to show you how I recommend you don't lose it. And even if the patterns you're knitting in the round don't tell you to do this, I definitely recommend it. It's something I do myself, that even if it's not in the pattern, to look after my shawls, because that's what you're trying to do all the time in brioche, is to keep your shawls in place. Bring your yarn forward, slip the next stitch, bring my yarn over, brioche knitting, and then with this very last stitch, bring your yarn forward, slip that stitch, and now your inclination will be to just leave the yarn at the back. But you know yourself, if you let that yarn lurking around there, it's going to come forward, and by the time you've knit another round, it'll be lost forever. Take it all the way around the needle and bring it to the front so that you complete the shawl on that last stitch before you slip the marker. That is the most important thing. And I can't say it enough. With the main color, bring it to the front, slip your marker, and then you're ready to start the next round with your blue yarn. And again, no need to cross them. If you were doing color work or anything like that, there's no need to, you don't cross them in brioche like that. They kind of look after themselves. Just going to cut off, because I have a lot of tail going on. Does anyone have any questions? How are we all getting on? Anyone wants to unmute themselves? I'm going to pause briefly. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to do one more round in the blue, and then I'm going to go back and I'm going to repeat the setup row again so that people can see that. And then I'll go back to knitting and purling on this one, because it's actually the same once you've seen the setup row. Has anyone any questions? Awesome. Brilliant, Fran.
Can I just remind myself, what have we just done?
Yep, right. So here on the pattern, so what we've done, so the first thing we've done is we did the setup round in the contrast color, so in the blue. Yeah. We did a yarn forward, slip one, purl, where we added the shawls to the slip stitches for the first time. And now we've done round one, main color, brioche knit, yarn forward, slip one, yarn over, and that was in the gold yarn. Yeah. So that's where we are right now. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to work round one, contrast color, and I'm going to show you how to do the brioche pearls. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and do the setup round again so that everybody has seen it. And then the secret is that that's all there is to brioche in the round until you change colors. I feel like a fraud when I teach this class, but it gives us loads of time for questions and kind of mistakes and stuff like that at the end as well. So,
Michelle, can I ask a question?
Of course.
Hi, it's Charlotte. I had to start again because I was knitting with my tail and I didn't realise till I got to the end of the tail. So I've picked it back and I've done working on my first row. When you slip one on that first setup round, am I slipping it knitwise or purlwise?
Purlwise, always purlwise.
Yep. That's what I thought you said. Thank you very much.
No problem, not at all. And I will go back and do the setup again so that everybody sees it. And then because we'll work a few more rounds then on this piece, they're all the same from now on. Well, we'll do this one now, and then after that they're all the same. So I pick up my contrast color, and now I'm going to, you'll see a kind of a pattern here. In my setup round, I had I brought my yarn forward, I slipped one yarn over, but instead of purling, this time we call it a brioche purl, and the only difference is because the stitches are now shawled. And that's literally all it is. When I do the next setup round, would I start the next round as well? Absolutely no problem, Fran. That's where the rubber hits the road, is those kind of starting ones. So absolutely, I'll do that loads of times tonight for sure. So I'm going to work this one first. So the round one contrast color, and then I go back and do the setup round again. So my dears, I'm bringing my yarn forward through the needles because I'm going to slip. I'm going to avoid my tail. Bring it forward through the needles. Slip my next stitch. bring over my yarn, so my yarn over, and remember I'm purling my next stitch, so I've got to come through. So I come back through, and you can see I put a shawl on that stitch that I shawled the first time. I'm now shawling it again, and this time I'm purling. So you'll see again with this one, and I'll talk about the colors you're expecting as well. So I knit the two of those together, I purl the two of those together. I then slip my next stitch because my yarn is already in front with my purls, so that's handy for this. You don't have to bring it forward. That's the one thing you'll find between the knit rows and the purl rows. With the knit, you explicitly bring it forward. With the purl, the yarn is already forward for doing your slip stitches. So slip it, bring it over the top, bring it forward again to purl. And we were talking about how you would know if you stopped. So again, the stitches that are on their own are slipped because they're the other color. So this is my contrast. I know I'm going to be slipping my orange stitches, and I'm going to be working my blue stitches that have the orange shawls on them. So that's a really good way of remembering as well when you're working in two different colors. I'm going to slip, bring my yarn over and bring it forward and brioche purl. And then I'm going to, that's it. Let me see now, I have some questions. I've got to the last stitch and it would be a slip, not a purl. So if you are working, Emily, is that in the setup round that you're working that in? If you had an even number of stitches when you started, it may be that you have missed one or you have done two stitches together. Or it might be that you have an uneven number of stitches accidentally. If it is, we can look at fixing that as well. So I'm bringing my yarn forward, I'm purling two together, I'm slipping one, and I'm purling two together. And you'll see that it's already beginning to look like a kind of knit stitches, very, very slowly at one side. If I turn over, well, you won't see it in the back just yet. I'll have to do a few more. So slip one and bring the yarn forward, and purl, slip one, bring the yarn forward and purl, slip one, bring the yarn forward and purl. So let me just have a look now because I think we have a few little errors. Yes, so that's in the setup and I had an even number of stitches. So the likelihood there, Emily, is that when you were working, if you've come to the end of the setup round and you didn't have a purl stitch at the end, it means that you are likely to have either slipped two stitches or you have purled two stitches in the same place. The best way to go back and check is to count them in sets of two. So do I have a stitch and a stitch with a shawl, a stitch with a stitch and a shawl, a stitch with a stitch and a shawl? And what I'm going to do is once I finish this, we'll do the next setup round again so everyone has seen that twice. And then what I'll do is I will show you how to pull back brioche. Slowly is how you pull it back. So I'm going to slip, bring the yarn forward, purl the stitches. So you're now literally doing brioche. Slipping, bringing the yarn forward, doing your brioche purl. Slipping, yarn forward, brioche purl. Slip your stitch, yarn over, brioche purl. And Fran, if you in terms of option one, instead of option two of the main pattern, you can literally just knit option one the whole way down now. It actually makes no difference. You don't even have to do the change if you don't want to, because the start of the option two is exactly the same. Slip one, yarn over, come to the front, brioche purl. And slip one, yarn over, brioche. So things to remember about brioche: pairs of stitches that we've talked about, and also the way that the colors work. So you have your stitches that are coming up. The stitch should be the opposite color to the one you're working with. The stitch that's you're slipping, and the one that you're working should have a shawl of the other color and should be the same as the yarn that you're working. Slip one, bring it forward, brioche purl. We're going to go back, don't worry, start over again. Right now it looks like I'm holding your one. Yes, doing a one by, it looks like a one by one rib, so it'll look very like it. As long as you have shawled them, it'll look very, it is like a one by one rib. And that is the joy of brioche. It actually is very like one. All the only difference is that you have the slip stitches in it. So I'm coming around now to the start of our marker. Slip one yarn over, bring it forward. Slip one yarn over, bring it forward. Slip one yarn over, forward. And now I'm coming up to the end, and in the pattern it says, drop the contrast color to the back of the work and bring the main color to the back of the work as well. And I'm going to show you how you have to be very specific as we get here. Now, first thing to do is when you're working the purl row, make sure your shawl is still on. You want to make sure that that shawl is still on that last stitch. So I slip one and over, bring it forward, brioche purl, and then I take both yarns together through to the back. And that gives you your knit pass, your purl pass, and you have now worked the full round of brioche knitting. So let me have a quick peep at some questions, then slip your marker, both yarns to the back, and you have now worked your main color and your contrast color in round one, and you were literally working that until it's 23 centimeters from the cast on edge. I bet you're all thinking that can't be it, but it is when you're working the round. That's why I teach it in the round, first time round, and then we'll show you how to change colors. There's a little bit of concentrating here, but we will look at that in just a moment. Let me have a quick peep at questions. And I, let me see. So yes, definitely if you have missed a stitch somewhere, Emily, in that. Right now it looks like I'm holding my yarn double and doing 1 by 1 rib. Let me see. As long as you're not holding your yarn both at the same time, and it looks like you're getting the double up like that, that's what you're supposed to be getting. Because if you look at it, you will be getting a knit stitch and a purl and a knit and a purl. So you're definitely doing, that's it. So I'm going to work the setup again. I'm going to show you that move into the, so the move back in. So I'm going to work this again, where we drop this piece and then start the row again. Because I think that's probably the most tricky. For those of you who are motoring on, keep going, just keep knitting. Brioche knit, yarn forward, slip one yarn over, and then the next one is the contrast color. The other thing to watch for as well, if you are doing that, watching for your fallen off shawls. So making sure that you're not getting any fallen shawls. And you can check them on the back side as well. So even though we've only done one round, you can still see that you will be getting columns of blue stitches at the back of your work. So again, make sure you're not getting any fallen shawls there either. So I'm going to move, I'm going to use a different yarn. So we're going to do the setup again. What is a shawl? So what I call in the shawl is when I do the yarn over and it puts that, when you slip the stitch, you give it a little shawl. So it's that extra piece of yarn that when you do the slip one yarn over, you shawl the stitches. It's what it's called in brioche. So instead of having your slip stitch, your yarn at the front or the back, it goes over the top. We call them shawls. Some people call them hoods, but they're just a little extra. We call them shawl. I think shawls is nice because we're all knitters and everybody needs a shawl. So I'm going to start again. This time in some very nice yarn, actually. So I'm going to purl the stitch, and this time you'll see me, I'm doing it on a 1 by 1 rib, so you can see how the effect will actually build up in the pattern as well. So I'm going to purl my stitch. This is my main color, is my cream this time. Now we'll talk a bit more at the end about which color to use where, because you hear people talking about light side, dark side, light color, dark color. Not going to confuse it. When you're working in the round, most patterns will be main color and contrast color. We'll worry about the others at the end. I don't like to worry about things that we don't, a lot of people worry too. Don't worry too far in the future. Don't know and that's not just knitting advice. That is life advice. So that conversation with someone recently, and I was like, no, don't worry too far in advance. It's, it doesn't do anyone any good. So again, my yarn at the back of my work, pinch it between your fingers if you want to tension it, and bring it forward. By the way, if I have any continental knitters at the end, we can stay on and I can show you how to do this continental style. It's ropey, but I can do it if you need it. Right, my yarn is at the front of my work, and I slip my first stitch. So this is what we're doing. We're with the yarn in front, we're slipping yarn over and purling. So slip it, yarn over it, bring it to the front, and purl. So you can see now that we're adding the shawl. So this is what the setup row does all the time in brioche, and you do this when you're working in the flat or when you're working in the round. I am actually flickering a little bit. I don't love that. Let me just, I don't want this to flicker for people. This can be very irritating. Apologies, I've only just noticed that. I'm trying to watch myself. So again, I'm at the back of my work. I want to come forward. Let me just remember where I was. Yes. just purled. Yes, so my yarn is at the front. Sorry, I just right. So I'm at the front of my work, so I've just purled. So I'm going to slip one, yarn over, bring it back to the front to purl my next stitch. So we're setting up again. So you can see now that you've seen it in action a little bit. You have the knit stitches are shawled and the purls are just purled. Okay, good. Yeah, it does. It takes a couple of rounds, so a couple of full rounds before it looks normal. A bit like the knit when you do it flat as well, because it's 2 passes each round before you get the full round. It can feel a bit, oh, when is it going to take shape? So that's the thing about it. But once you have done maybe 2 or 3 full passes, it'll really, really look like it's supposed to. And if you find actually the first few of these that you're dropping shawls and making mistakes, keep going. You know, you can rip back later, but do give yourself a chance. It's like when you learn to cast on and knitting at first, the casting on is the tricky bit, you know, and then once you get into it, you get some practice. So again, slip one, yarn over, bring to the front and purl. Slip my stitch, bring it over, bring it back to the front, and that's my little shawl gone onto my stitch. Then I'm going to purl 2 together. So slip one, bring it forward, well, yarn over and then bring it forward and purl. Slip one, yarn over the top, bring to the front, purl. Slip one, yarn over, bring to the front, and purl. You're probably thinking this can't be it. It is it in the round when you learn to do these stitches. And once you get this, everything else in brioche will make perfect sense. So we're slipping, we're bringing it over, we're bringing it to the front, and we're knitting. We're not knitting, we're purling. We're working the stitch. So slip one, yarn over, bring to the front, and purl. Slip one, yarn over, bring to the front, and purl. I have to say, I could sit here doing this all night. Slip one, yarn over, bring to the front, and purl. I'm going to keep doing that. Does anyone have any questions? How are we getting on? I'll see if I can replicate some errors if you guys want me to as well. Slip one, yarn over, purl. Slip one, yarn over, purl. Slip one, yarn over, back to the front and purl. And you'll find that sometimes the urge to bring it to the front will happen to you after you've been doing a lot of knit rounds. That's perfectly normal as well. It's like anything. Oh yeah, I'm glad. And it's like anything, it just takes that little bit of extra time. And I think with the brioche, we rush it, and it's a tricky one. There's a lot to learn in it because it is a whole other stitch. Slip one, bring to the front and purl. And we often start with like patterns in the flat with really nice motifs in them because they look beautiful, but this is the very basics of it. Slip one, yarn over, front and purl. Always slipping with the yarn at the front. I have a little set of notes actually that I have. I'll pop them into the group. They're like a really long, boring presentation. You've now found suspected ripping back. Oh no. Oh Jane, I know. But you know what? Being able to fix it is the most important thing at knitting. We all know that. Slip one, yarn over, bring to the front and purl. And then we're going to drop the contrast color to the back of the work. So bring it back through the needles and drop it. Now I'm going to start again the next round. So I'm going to do round one, main color. I think Fran, you were waiting for me here. Let me see now. So let me go slip my marker. Now remember, you should have a shawl on it because you came forward with your yarn and then you slipped one. And then you pick up your main color. And then you're just going to knit, brioche knit, your shawl and your cream stitch together with your cream yarn, well, your main color. You're going to knit those together. And that's your brioche knit stitch. And then you bring your yarn back to the front. So that's the yarn forward part of you bring it to the front. Now, some patterns will tell you about the yarn forward in this part, in the abbreviations, but it might not be mentioned in the pattern. So the yarn forward might be silent. That is definitely something that you need to look at. And that is the one thing that I would tell you is you'll see slightly different versions of brioche patterns written by different designers. None of them are wrong, but the yarn forward is sometimes silent. So do watch for that. That yarn forward on a brioche knit row is the most important thing in brioche. If you remember nothing else, my dears, that is the one. So I'm slipping, bringing it over and knitting. Drop the shawl and retrieve it. Oh, perfect. that is the skill in brioche. Bring it over and then knit one. And you'll see them very quickly if you drop them. You'll see them particularly at the front. So bring it up, slip, and knit those together. Now, if you had dropped one, so I'll show you what it looks like again. So say it could have fallen off the back. And what you'll find then is you'll be working along and you'll be like, something not quite right there, and you'll think, right, I have my main color, so all my main color stitches should be shawl this time, but they're not, so you know that it's likely there. And if you look into the inside, you'll see a very obvious color along the back that's not right. Don't worry, Lorna, they'll be available to watch afterwards. You'll definitely be able to see it after. It'll be here for you when you're ready. Then lift the shawl back up, pop it onto the needle. No problem, just bring it back up. Just pretend it's kind of just fallen off its shoulder. And then brioche knit those together. Again, slip one, brioche knit, slip one, brioche knit. And again, the yarn over bit becomes just part of what you do when you're brioche knitting. In the same way that if you're doing linen stitch, it comes over and you slip it in a slightly different way. That's all it is. And because you're slipping it in a slightly different way and you're giving it the little shawls at the top, brioche knit. Now, for those of you who are continental style knitters, I'm going to demonstrate what it looks like continental style. For those of you who don't continental knit, look away now, my dear. Your first shawl of round one has disappeared. So Louise, that is really, really common. So that is, don't worry about it. If it has fallen off way back here, it's really common to lose that one, particularly if you might have not come through from the start. It's knowing that it's easy to lose is probably the most important point of that. So if it has gotten lost, just remember that if it was sticking out here at the front, all you have to do is just pop it back over the needle in the shawl shape. Shawls can be really easily put on like that. So if you are a continental style knitter, you'll have to bear with me a small bit because my continental knitting is slow. If you're not a continental knitter, look away now. So with the continental knits, you still have to bring your yarn forward of the needle. It feels a little bit more, so I hold mine like that for continental knitters. You bring it forward of the needle and slip it. And then you have to bring it forward. You don't have to bring it forward to knit because it's continental knit. And then you just knit it. So again, with the continental, bring it forward, slip the two of them together, and then knit the two stitches. I am not a natural continental knitter, so I'm probably doing that backwards, but you get the idea. You still have to bring it forward, and then you knit it through the back again. So continental, bring it forward, and then knit them. So it feels like a slightly different movement with the continental. So if you're a continental knitter, come in from the back, make sure you grab the knit to shawl, slip it off, and then knit your next stitch. Forward and knit. So that's just to show you for my continental folk. What if you keep missing a shawl at the setup? Just keep going, friend. I would practice it and then take it back out, is what I would say. I wouldn't, you know, the way the more you do of it, the more you'll see it come through in the pattern and the easier it will get. In the same way that if you have to keep going back to the cast on when you learn, it would just be a nightmare. So just keep going, because it doesn't make a huge difference. Because say I don't have a shawl on this stitch, I can still knit it, and in the next round I can shawl it. It'll look wrong, but I will still get the practice of it. And you're going for practice, not perfection. Sorry, I've been listening to too many business things, and it's like practice, not perfection. So please excuse me if I sound like Malibu Barbie every now and again. So yarn forward, snipping, brioche knitting, yarn forward, slipping, brioche knitting, yarn forward, slipping, brioche knitting. Yes, that's right. I'm working the first round again. So what am I doing? Become mesmerized by it. So you think you have done yarn overs instead of yarn forwards. Ah, okay. So for those of you, so an interesting one about yarn overs. So if you were doing a yarn over like this, technically, the correct way to do a yarn over is to come forward and then go over the needle. So an ordinary yarn over. I have seen people who've been taught to yarn over this way, and that's okay. It's just that it doesn't work for brioche. So yeah, that's what I would say is if you are somebody who does your yarn overs like this, because that's how you were taught, I don't want to say correct, because I hate correcting people, but the way that most people do a yarn over is this way. So through the needles and then over. For brioche, it has to be that way that you're doing it. So Charlotte, that might be what's catching you. So I'm coming up to the end here again. Now you'll see I have a slip, a brioche knit and a slip ahead of me. Yarn forward, slip one, brioche knit. Remember what we said about slip stitches at the end. You are looking after the shawl. So bring the yarn forward through the needles, slip that stitch, bring it all the way around to look after the shawl. If you have nothing else as well, but this again is something so important that you just don't lose those shawls at the end, because that is where the biggest issue in brioche in the round comes from. Slip your yarn, no need to cross over, and then pick up your contrast yarn again. And then we're back here to the start. And what we're going to do then is we're working with yarn in front, slip one yarn over, brioche purl all the way around again. Yarn forward. Use the marker, of course. Slip one. Yarn over, bring to the front to brioche purl, and you see that I'm stitch is green, matching my yarn, and my shawl is the contrast color. And I'm purling those. And that is brioche in the round, with the exception of the color change. And once you get this, you can then move on to lots of, excuse me, the hiccups. You can move on to lots of other things with brioche. This is how I recommend learning it, because what it does is it teaches you the nice structure. It teaches you what you're looking for and how to get that setup row done, etc. Terry, you're kidding me. You must have done brioche before. Oh, funny. I'm remiss if I haven't like forced you into the brioche at the stage. Terry's been a minutes member for quite a wee while, but I'm really glad it's working for you, my dear. For anyone who wants a small bit of practice, you can do this on any number of even stitches as well. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to work a couple more rounds. I'll take any questions that people have. Is there anyone with difficulties? And I'll see if I can imitate them for you. I'm going to do a few rounds while I talk, so that I can then do a color change for people who are ready. If you are not ready to do a color change, don't one. So on the slip part, are you taking the stitch off before doing the yarn over? It's actually, it becomes one movement. So you don't, so let me show you what I mean, Emily. You can do it as a so you can slip it and then take the yarn over and purl the next stitch. Or you can slip it at the same time and then purl the next, well, I'm purling in this case. It's either or, it doesn't actually matter. So you can feel more comfortable to do it after you slipped it and then purl. And it might be better when you're learning to remember to do it, or it might feel more comfortable as a single movement where you shawl it at the same time as you slip it and then you purl them together. I think when you're brioche knitting, it's actually easier to do them, to actually shawl the stitch as you knit the next stitch. But the purling, I would say, slip it and then kind of bring it all the way around, and that's your yarn over, and then do your purl stitch. You'll kind of pick a way that works for yourself. How high contrast should it be? You know, again, it's a little bit subtle. Let me have a look at the two sets that I have. Yeah, they're quite high contrast. Yeah, let me see what I have. I tend to use quite contrasting because you do want to not lose, and I'm going to show you particularly in a 4-ply, you can see that these are kind of high contrast and I'm changing colors every place. You do want to be able to see them kind of stand out, and even here the black might get a little bit lost, so a good high contrast. But the thing is a little swatch. Sorry, Chrissy, have I missed yours? Let me see. Oh, measuring gauge. Sorry, Chrissy, I'm sorry I missed that one. And this is another kind of high contrast one. Sorry, Chrissy, let me answer that question for you. So brioche gauge is a tricky one to measure, and the reason is that it is a much plumper stitch than other stitches. You're also counting it slightly differently. So say this is my knit stitch here, this is one, but this is one whole row. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's actually 16 passes in there though. So I'll have done one knit, one slip, and then I'll have done one slip, purl, slip, purl, slip, purl to get that one V. Whereas normally in knitting, that one V would be one knit round. It's 2 full passes to get that round. So that's one of the things to remember about it. But brioche, you in the same way though that you lay it out and you would count the V's to get your gauge, and then you would count your purls. This would be 1 stitch, 2 stitch, 3 stitch, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So it's measured in the same way, it comes out very differently, is the gauge. So that's the difference between them. Whereas this is 8 rounds, but it is 16 passes. In the pattern, I have written mine as, and it's a great question. So I have 20 stitches and 26 rounds. And a brioche round is made up of a main color and a contrast color round. So that just means that it's a single round that I'm counting. So that's the 26 rounds. So they're actually the 2 passes is how I'm counting those in mine. One thing is to check how, one thing to check around that is to make sure you know what the designer has written in the pattern, because there are slightly different standards in brioche. So I'm going to keep going now, my dears. I'm going to knit a few more rows, and then I'm going to show you how to change color for anyone who's ready. And then we're going to go and we're going to talk about, just a little bit of talk about how this varies when you do it flat, and then how you're going to kind of just a little bit of talk about increasing and decreasing, and how now that you've seen it, all the little rules we talked about earlier link back to it. So let me see. On the brioche row, is it okay that the yarn over sits beside it? Yep, absolutely. As long as you remember to pick it up. Yeah, so the 8 is shown. So it's, 8 rounds is kind of 16 passes. So yeah, Chrissy, that's exactly what it is. So now I'm here at the end, slip 1, bring my yarn forward, brioche purl, and then I bring both yarns back to the back of the work to kind of complete my both passes for my 1 round. So back into the pattern side. Yeah, so let's have a look at that, Fran. That's a great question as well. So I'm going to swap over. Where am I? I'm knitting. And the way I'm checking, by the way, which one I'm on, I'm going, which color are the stitches that are coming up? And they're in my contrast, or they're in my main color. So I know I need to work with my main color next. So I'm doing a brioche knit. So the 2 of those together. So if you are slipping them and they're going a little bit sideways, so say I bring my yarn forward and I slip, and it looks more like it's beside it. So it actually, if you do this, when you're pulling, it pulls across. But if you do this, it sits slightly more behind it. So it is possible that it looks like it's more beside it than above it. Doesn't make a huge difference, Fran, to be honest. So yeah, that's what it is. It doesn't make a difference if they're together. All that matters is that you knit them together when you're in the next round. Well, in this case, I'll be purling my purl stitches. So it doesn't matter if they sit right across it or if they sit slightly beside. So actually you can see the difference here when I moved it over first and then kind of work behind it, or I pass over the top. It doesn't make a huge difference. They're exactly the same. You just need to remember, because the cross happens further back on this and it's here on this one. So it doesn't make any difference, friend. If I stop for a cup mid-row and you don't know where you are, and you've worked yarn at both ends, how can you work out into, that working flat? So again, when you're working flat, it's what did I do last? So generally what you've just done is where you've added your shawls. So you're not working in the yarn, you've just shawled in, Sarah, is kind of what you're looking for, and that'll work for flat and round. So if, for example, I finished a round, so this is my row that I was working flat, I would look at this and I would think, right, the last shawls I put on were my cream yarn. That means that my next row is going to be in my main, it's going to be in my green. And the reason for that is that my green stitches have the white shawls, and I'm not going to do another round and get a bunch of more white shawls, because that just wouldn't work. So that's how you know after you've had tea. So the knit round, so the knit row that I'm doing it at the moment. Yeah, so I'm coming up to the stitch. I bring my yarn forward. It doesn't have a shawl, so I know that I'm going to be slipping it. Bring my yarn forward to the front. So this is on the knit round. Slip it. Bring my yarn over it. And as I go over it, the difference between this and the purl is that with the purl, you have to come back through to purl your stitch, whereas this time I'm going over the top and I'm going to knit the two of those together. Knit the two stitches together. So actually, when you're doing the knit ones, and I think AJ, you were asking about this, or Emily, apologies, this, I bring it to the front, and as I slip, I can bring it across and knit, or I can come to the front, and as I can actually just slip it and then insert my needle to brioche knit the next one and then create my shawl as I go. I don't recommend that when you're learning though, because I would do it as two separate movements and then knit the stitch, just so that you know you're making sure you shawl them. But as you get into it, coming forward, slipping your stitch when you're on the knit side and then just knitting it. It makes perfect sense because it just becomes part of the movement. How's that, Charlotte? Do you have any more questions about it, my dear? So yarn forward, slip, and then over the top and knit the next stitch. Okay, great, perfect. Anyone have any more questions, my dears? Thing, slip, knit two together. Perfect. Yarn forward to the front, slip, knit two together. And you're probably all thinking, this is very straightforward. I hope you are, because it is. It just takes a little bit. I think the thing is when I started to do brioche first, I started into probably, you meet them first in like a really fancy shawl, and it's not, you just don't, the logistics of it aren't as clear because it's part of a pattern. And a lot of designers, you're not learning something as part of it. So it's assumed knowledge. And it's taught in different ways online as well, which is why I start with it in the round when I'm teaching it in workshops. I also build up to it when my full brioche class is, I start with single color brioche, like we do with the double knitting. So we're all the way around again. We're coming around to the marker. This yarn is not available anymore. It's actually, sorry, I'm just telling you because it feels beautiful. It's the cashmere yarn from Luxury Yarns, so Orchidean Luxury Yarns now, but I don't think Abby stocks it anymore. And I never realized until I started knitting this how lovely a yarn it is. Terrible shame. Really nice. So yarn forward, slip one, knit two together, and we're going to do a purl pass. And then for those of you who are interested, we're going to do a we will do a, right, before I talk anymore, we'll do a color change, but not yet. I'm going to knit the two of these together. This is the way. And remember what we said when we have a slip at the end. Yarn forward, slip the stitch, bring it all the way around to protect that shawl. Front of the work, slip your marker, pick up your green yarn, your contrast color at this stage, and you're ready to work your brioche purl round. Awesome. So I'm going to work this, and again, I'm going to keep talking. Knitting is one of those things where you think it's not, there's no quick way to shortcut it. So I'm slipping, my yarn is at the front, always, 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 always at the front. Then over the top and bring it forward to purl. And that's the difference between the brioche purling and the brioche knitting. And when you start at the start, sometimes you will actually go to purl, you'll go to knit your purl stitch, and you'll go to knit you'll go to purl your knit stitches. That's perfectly okay. But now you can actually see as I start this second pass of round 2, you can now see that I have 2 full knit stitches on this side, and I'm beginning to see columns of stitches at the back as well in the dark green. So about 4 passes or 2 rounds in, you begin to see it emerge. And once it emerges, it becomes way easier. So what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to go wrong. I'm going to just purl across here, and I'm going to forget that shawl. So I'm going to show you how to fix those as well as we go around next time. So I'm going to miss a few of them. I'm going to take it through to the back and just miss it out. And I'll show you what it looks like when they're missing and how you can spot them. So does anyone have any questions? Just about brioche generally as well, if you want to ask any other questions for, if you've done a little bit and you have any questions about kind of other bits and pieces of it. Once you get used to working it in the round and then flat, does brioche work? Okay, oh, that's an interesting one. Non-sticky yarns. Yeah, no, so there shouldn't be any problem with it. The only thing is that it, like any time you knit with, say, a cotton, etc., you just won't get it kind of settling into itself like a wool or like an animal fiber does. So that's the only difference that it's going to have. Chrissy, is that like bamboo and cotton, it'll just stand out a bit more, like you still get that definition that's slightly different to the wool, and that's the same in brioche as well. There's no reason why it won't work. It just will have a different kind of fabric in the same way that they do. You find it easier. Oh, I'm glad, Julie. Yeah, and it's you can listen back to me anytime. But yeah, it's brioche patterns can be funny as well. There's a lot of effort in them. In my full class, I do brioche chart reading and stuff. The one thing I would say as well, by the way, for those of you who don't read charts, if you want to progress on with brioche, learning how to read charts it will save you a lot of heartache in the long run. Brioche is definitely, because there's loads of words in it and the terms are longer. So say, for example, if I'm doing a left-leaning decrease in it, it looks like a left-leaning decrease, but it'll have a brioche in front of it. That can make the instructions look really wordy. Extra H wherever I can find one. And that I would learn to read charts. So definitely, my dears, charts. So yeah, Chrissy, if you've done colour work with cotton, it's the same idea. If you do Fair Isle with cotton, it'll look quite different to the wool. But again, you'll be used to that difference if you knit with it a lot. So again, slipping, bringing it forward and purling, coming up to the end of my round now, slip one, bring it forward and purl the two of those together at the end, and then bring both yarns back to the start after you've finished both passes of that round. So we now have quite prominent knits. Now, when I look, my mistakes here, I'm like, oh, there it is, mistake, most common mistake. So give yourself a little chance when you start as well, is to kind of, don't worry too much about them, but do look every round and you'll see them, and then make sure you look on the inside as well. I think I dropped one somewhere on the back here. Here we are. And you'll also see, if you go around, you should be seeing shawl, stitch, shawl, stitch, shawl, stitch. Oh, missed one. And then as you come up to knit them, I'll show you what they look like as well. Oh, I want to see a pusheen. Right, so I was just reading Kat's comment about the pusheen. So superwash merino, yes, it would look really nice in the superwash merino. Let me see now. Is there any more? Yeah, so more. It's not. It's about how you like your fabric. That's really it. I love a natural fiber. But actually, sorry, an animal fiber, because obviously bamboo is a natural fiber. I find actually a funny one is linen stitch. Looks a little bit linen. I was using it gives a different fabric. It gives it a flatter one. So I was using a linen wool Nua, Cara Feller's Nua, and it gives us a very different effect, but it's really lovely. And always a swatch, my dears. And then you kind of know if you like the feel of it or not. But even this feels different. This is cashmere. I know, I'm so spoiled. I was like, I couldn't believe it when I found it in my stash, and I just love it. This is the kind of this is a wool acrylic, I think. And you can actually see that the cashmere is doing a beautiful job of this. Whereas this acrylic, the needle is probably a bit small for it anyway, but it's not quite as pretty. Oh, and I have an error here. I do. No, I don't. Oh, no, I don't. A bit loose stitches. And then you kind of get, this is the merino as well, and it'll give you a slightly different effect. So there isn't really one that's better. It's not like color work where you will get a very different effect if you use something like that's not a wool. So onwards, I'm going to change colors now. So for those of you who want to change colors, I'm going to go back and just show you how to do that. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about increasing and decreasing. So round one is the same as this one. So we've been brioche knitting and brioche purling. This time we're still going to be brioche knitting, yarn forwarding and slipping, but this time we're using the contrast color to do that round. And then we're going to use the main color to do the next round. This is the only, it's not that different. It's just that you need to remember what you're doing. So we're going to start in the contrast color this time. So we would be expecting to work in the white, but we're not because we're changing colors. So now this time I'm going to pick up my green and I'm going to knit my stitches and I'm going to slip my pearls because I'm changing colors. So again, the brioche knit is the first one, followed by the brioche purl. All I'm doing is changing color. You'll see why it's a little bit, it's not difficult. It's not difficult, it's just that it can look a bit funny when you do the first two rounds. So I'm knitting, and this time I'm going to be shawling with the same color yarn because I'm changing colors. So it's actually not any different. You're not doing anything out of the ordinary. You just need to remember that at the first round, it can look a little bit confusing because you are still brioche knitting your brioche knit stitches. You are still bringing your yarn forward and slipping and shawling, but you're doing it in the same color. Now, I'm here and I can feel that I know that I should be knitting these together because I've just slipped one and there's a fallen shawl. All you have to do, pick it up, take your stitch off the needle and then pop them back in. And it doesn't really matter what position they're in as long as they're not twisted. So now I'm going to knit that stitch. So it takes a little bit of concentrating when you're changing colors. So that's the only thing about changing colors in brioche. There is a thing called syncopated brioche, and that is where you make your knits pearls and your pearls knits, but we're not going to get to that tonight for sure. I can show you what that looks like because I have a small piece of it as well. I think I'm missing a shawl here as well. And you kind of notice very quickly, you're going to knit them, you're going to work them, and they don't have any shawls. You have to reach down the back, pick it up, and pop it back on. And that's how you rescue your shawls. Some of them will feel a little bit tight, but don't worry about that. They'll work themselves out, as always. Yarn forward, slip one, brioche knit. Yarn forward, slip one, brioche knit. Forward, slip one, brioche knit. I could knit this around and around and around all night. And actually, if you are practicing, I would highly recommend doing it because you get a really good feel. And your hands, it's like anything with knitting, in the way when you learn to stitch, you can actually feel, you'll feel that you're missing shawls. And you'll feel, a bit like when you know you're missing like a yarn over in a piece of knitting or a cable that you're missing, like, it doesn't feel quite right. You get the same feeling from brioche the more you do it as well. So we're brioche knitting, and this time obviously we're changing colors, so I'm working in the contrast color first. Most important thing with this is as I come up to the start of the round, I remember that I'm going to be slipping with the color. I wasn't bringing my yarn all the way around, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So coming up to the end, let's just remember again, we're back here again, still remembering this. So even though we're changing colors, we're going to make sure that we don't lose that shawl there. Turn forward, slip one, brioche knit. Turn forward, slip one, brioche knit. Forward, slip one, brioche knit. I'm going to come forward, slip one, and then we're going to leave it in the front because it is now, I'm working with my contrast color, but I want to leave it in the front because I'm working that first round with the knits. Protecting my shawl. And now you're probably thinking, what am I going to do now? Because it's all the same color. Don't worry. All you do is remember that you're still going to be slipping the ones without the shawls and working the ones with the shawls And this is the purl one, so you're going to be purling those ones with shawls. Plus at this stage, as you go to change color, you will generally have very, very defined columns already. So you know that you are purling, so that should be in the purl rounds, and then you should be slipping your knits because it's a brioche purl round. So let's go for it. I'm going to bring my yarn forward, slip my stitch, bring it back over as I yarn over it, then purl the two of these together. And now you can see as I go along, slipping and purling, you will see that it is now shawling those stitches in the different color. So you'll actually have changed color by just doing these 2 rounds, and then you'll just be ready to continue on again doing those. And then you'll be able to swap back in exactly the same way. So again, you just do the same thing, you're just swapping those yarns around. You don't swap from purls to knits or anything like that. You just swap from, you just swap to the colors. That's all it is. It's like anything in knitting, really straightforward. Does anybody have any questions about doing that? I'm hoping we're all good. I'm just knitting peacefully. And I would say if you go wrong, just keep going. Unless you want to make it perfect, in which case maybe do a little small one. Again, any even number of stitches on any small needle. So if you happen to have like a short circular like I do, I think this is a 40, maybe 30 even, or you have a sock wonder or something like that, that's like a 26 centimeter, an even number of stitches, and you'll get into the rhythm of it and give it a little practice as well. Learning how to do any technique in the middle of a pattern adds to the pressure. That's why I like swatching in a way, because you get to practice the stitch before you do it. So it's not just about the gauge, it's about a little bit of like being kind to yourself. I think most of us want to be so good at everything so quickly, and it's a little bit of patience. I know a Hallmark card. I have to be quiet. Slipping, brioche knit, purling, slipping, brioche purling. My yarn is the front because I'm brioche purling. Purl, slip, bring it forward to purl. Then I'm coming up to the end. I slip one, bring it to the front, and purl 2 together. It is much less complicated. I'm really glad you think so, Julie Marie, because I think we make things very difficult and we start at different points. I think that's the problem sometimes, is we start techniques, all of us do, I definitely. You start a technique in a pattern and it can be the trickier part of it. And you think it's going to be, it's not, you haven't learned up to it. And I think sometimes it's, some people dive straight in. Sometimes it can be more tricky if you get straight into a pattern and you do something difficult. So you can now see starting to emerge are my green stitches at the tops of my white columns. So I have now changed colors in brioche. So the only thing is when you do those first passes in the first colors is just to concentrate on them. It's like pretty much anything. So that is brioche in the round with a little bit of a color change. So I'm just going to talk a little bit more about brioche then generally, because obviously people will go on and do various bits and pieces from here. I'm going to show you some of the kind of ways that you can progress on with it and just give you a little a few of the little rules that kind of go with brioche. Things you want to look out for are when you're increasing and decreasing, and these actually work as increases or decreases. So purl 2 together. I missed that. It's the last stitch on the brioche purl row. Yeah, so the brioche purl rows end with a brioche purl. So that is the purl 2 together. Well, it's the shawl and the stitch. So it is a purl, it's a brioche purl in the purl row that you finish on that with, not the slip stitch. So with the 2 stitches in pairs, you have to increase in multiples of 2. So I go from having 1 stitch to 3 stitches. So it means that you always create 2. So if I have 1 stitch, it becomes 3. If I have 1 stitch, it can become 5, it can become 7, it can become 9. The reason for that is if I had 1 stitch and I only created 2 rows, I would then have a knit, a purl, and a purl if I didn't have that extra leg. So it's something you'll see a lot of. Your stitches fan out quite a lot when you're doing brioche increases. We don't have to worry about that now. It's not in the pattern. It's just so that you're aware of it kind of for the future. This is what is like a brioche make. This turns into 3. This one is turning into 5. When you're decreasing, it's the same idea. You have a left leaning 3 become 1. You have a right leaning 3 become 1, or you can have a set that you have the central double decrease equivalent, which is where you have 5 stitches and they become 1. Now these are the increases, but the idea is the same. If I was decreasing, you always lose 2 or gain 2, or you gain 4, or you lose 4, depending on the type of increase or decrease. Something to remember in brioche, because if you only increase 1 stitch, you lose the pairs, and that's just something that is part of kind of the way brioche works. You can't make it reversible, but there is some you can learn how to make those reversible as well. Life is very short. Really is possible. In plain styles like this is reversible though. And you can see that you get the gold columns, they run the back of the pearls. So that's quite neat. So it is reversible, particularly in a plainer version. That's the increasing and decreasing. You'll hear people talking about brioche lace and brioche cables. So this is where you have, these are double yarn overs, and then on the following round, you would turn them back into a knit and a purl. And the reason they're a double yarn over is because a double yarn over increases the 2 stitches. So you have that extra stitch for working. It's 2 stitches in the double yarn over, which is why it's used a lot when you're doing brioche lace, because it creates that 2 extra stitches. It also gives you a really nice defined hole in the knitting. So you need that kind of extra bit to give it the chunky fabric, giving it the lace effect. Cables in brioche, you can either do kind of fake cables by increasing and decreasing. So stuff like this. We turn this around. So you can create kind of really nice effects of yarns moving like that. They're actually not cables, they're just increases, they're decreases in a certain direction. So they're leaning in a particular way, or they're actually like this upside down. I think I might have this upside down. Oh, I do. That's what makes no sense to me. It's like, why is this not right? So here you'll see I am doing some decreases, and they give you that lovely effect where the columns go into one another. And then you see them fanning out here again as parts of the increases. So they look like traveling patterns, but actually they're just a series of increases and decreases. Then you can also do cables in brioche, where you are bringing the stitches forward and back like you would for cables. I don't have an example of that because I'm a much bigger fan of flat fake cables than I am of anything else. These are my own designs, but you'll see the big chunky cables in patterns as well, and they're pretty neat as well. So yeah, that is. Does anyone have any questions? Let me just go through my notes just so that I make sure we've talked about everything. So yes, I think we have our, each pass is worked twice. Stitches are in pairs. They get shawls. Your needle is always at the front of your work when you're slipping. I turn it the right way around. You always have a setup row around, because you do that for the first time you're shawling your stitches. And then there can be a combination of knits and purls. Fixing your knits. So when you're fixing brioche, actually the most important thing, I'm going to show you, I know some of you will have done this 1,000 times, but for those of you who don't, the kindest thing you can do for yourself when you are learning brioche, let me get a big enough diagonal, is to put in a lifeline every now and again. If you don't, now I know that for some of us who've been knitting a very long time, there's a certain amount of pride involved in not doing lifelines, but in brioche, it's really, really useful. Chrissy, when you finish the brioche and move to the rib, quite literally, you will cut your contrast color yarn, you finish your color section 1, you cut your contrast yarn, and then you will just move straight back into knitting and purling as normal. So that's it. There's no real trick. Actually, I'll show you now, because I can do that because we're just here. So say I was finishing my rib here. I'm going to work in my main color. It's now my main, we'll call it my main color for the want of better one. I would just do knit, purl, knit, and then go straight back into your rib. Or if I was going back into stocking stitch, I would just knit all the stitches around. That's it. There's nothing magical about it. It's all just kind of just going back into the single stitches and eating your shawls essentially. Finish the brioche purl row with both yarns to the back now. Yes, so as you come up to that, Fran, take both yarns. I'll show you that. I'll go back for it. Oh, by the way, when you are taking out brioche, take it out one color at a time. It's the same as ripping anything out. Make sure your needle goes in from front to back, and then slip out your stitch. And then when you're going in for the shawls, go right into the stitch below and grab both of them and come out. So it's the same as any time that you're knitting backwards. Stitch in, grab your stitch, and then pull out your yarn and give yourself the best chance of getting that right. Back we go, pull it out, and then we're back here, Fran, I think where you are at the moment. So yes, as I came up to it, I brioche purl that stitch, and I take the 2 yarns back to the back through the needles, ready to work. So that's all ready to go there as well. So for those of you who've never inserted a lifeline before, just in case, I'm going to start on this one because I think I might continue knitting that tonight. It feels nice. If you've never put in a lifeline, all a lifeline is it is just a piece of waste yarn, and you need to have it enough to go the whole way around your piece, or you can just put it on the ball and then cut it. So I'm going to use this. Thread your darning needle. If you're using a cable needle, or sorry, cable needle, a circular needle, move all your stitches onto the flat part of move them all onto the cable part of the circular needle. So what that means is that you've got lovely gaps to put your yarns into, or your needle through, and then thread your yarn all the way through. So threading it into one, threading it into the shawl in one, threading it into one. Make sure you catch the shawls and the stitches. Go all the way through. Call these lifelines because if you have to rip back, picking up your stitches is a lot easier than if you have to go back. And in brioche, it is harder to fix. It's not impossible. It does take a little bit more concentration. I won't have enough time to fit. If I do a piece more tonight, I will try to fit it into the fixing knits tomorrow. I don't love fixing it live because it's like it's going to go very badly wrong. But then to be fair, I think it's probably better if you see it go wrong as well, because it happens to us all. So I'm just threading this through to create my lifeline. I'm going to show you why it's useful in just a sec then. For anyone who hasn't inserted one before, lifelines are great. They're great for any purpose you want. Used predominantly in lace knitting because it's very difficult to find yarn overs if you have to rip back. But brioche, I would treat brioche the same from that perspective, because it is trickier to fix because there's lots of things going on. Not impossible. So all the way around. For those of you who haven't used a curved darning needle with a curved top on it, I highly recommend one. It changed my knitting life. But I'd say it's probably 10 years ago now. I went to a Rowan. They did, remember when they used to do Rowan consultants in the knitting shops? They might still do them. And she was doing a finishing class and she had a twisted end needle, and I've never looked back. I think it's actually what brought me back to knitting full time. So if you've never knit one, these are just clover chibis. I think it's pronounced chibis. Do all the way. So once you've got your lifeline in, keep going all the way around. And once your lifeline is in, you just ignore it essentially. So for anyone who's never knit with one in, you would just knit away. You kind of ignore it, and it gets knit into your work, and you can pull it out later on. But what it means is that if you have an incident with your brioche or anything that you're knitting, you can then say I'm ripping back. So pretend I've just made a mistake and I want to rip back, and I have to pull out all my stitches off my needle, and I have to frog. It means that when I go to pick up that round again, I haven't lost all the stitches and the shawls with it. So I know that most of you who are with me, I know have knitting experience and you'll have put in a lifeline before, but if you've not used one before, they're great because it means that I know where my yarns were, so they were here, so I can then take my needle and thread my stitches all the way along my lifeline to pick those back up. And I include that in the brioche because you are more likely to need it for this than you are for, just plain stocking stitch or anything like that. So